foundational level, which we believe is the QEM, fully funding the QEM. So I would love to answer any questions that you may have. Yes.
You know, the recent research that was released about Oregon, and we have a higher level of students with a disability and students living in poverty, for example, and that requires more funding, et cetera. Can you elaborate on what that looks like from the ground? Like what kind of resources are provided in those instances, and why does that cost more?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the question. I think it's very important for our community to hear, for our legislators to hear, that Portland Public Schools is the only school district that's an urban school district in the state of Oregon, right? And so with being in an urban center, in an urban city, we know that there are different unique needs that our learners face, right? And our families being impacted by housing, things that are happening in terms of mental health, and then, of course, all of the services. So I will say that those items impact education. I also have our Chief of Student Support Services, Buno, here that can share a little bit more on the impacts of special education and our students who are receiving additional funding or needing additional support.
Sorry, more specific question for you then. Do you have any data on how the caps to students with disability support in Oregon affect your district, specifically how many students are not supported at extra levels who need that extra support?
Yeah, sure. I appreciate the question. Jay Buno, I'm Chief of Student Support Services. So in Portland, we serve approximately 17% of our students in special education services, and the cap in Oregon for funding is 11%, and so that's approximately 8% of our students that don't receive the weighted funding. So what that means is that we have to fund our students through other means, which specifically is encroaching on our general fund. So that's millions of dollars that goes towards not supporting our students. So in citing specifically the research that was commissioned by the legislature that said that we severely underfund special education in the state of Oregon.
How does that impact other students? I think some people don't necessarily understand the correlation of when you don't fund special education, how that impacts all of the students. Could you speak to that?
So what it does is it says that we have to have other resources that are allocated for other students to serve programs for students that receive special education services. So we serve students whose programs can cost upwards of hundreds of thousands of dollars. And for a student with special education in the state of Oregon, we might receive $10,000, $20,000 to serve them. And so consequently what happens is students that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, we will still provide the services for them, and that means that the resources are taken away from other students.
Question for the superintendent. Couple questions. Last time around with the legislature, there was an ask for a certain amount of money. They provided that money, and then everybody said, oh, it needs to be far more than that. Where are you at this point with that? In other words, with the governor's, what she's asking for, you see that you're going to come back at some point and say, well, actually, things have increased, and we need more than that?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I will say that until we're fully funding the quality education model the way that it was set, we're going to continue to be in this conversation about inadequate funding. You know, we're in a complex system, right? And I know that oftentimes we want to kind of localize on the conversation of what's happening in schools. We also have significant transportation costs. You know, we have an obligation to make sure that we provide transportation to our students with IEPs, our students who live a certain distance, right? When buses break down, we fix those buses, right? When roofs leak, we make sure that we fix those roofs, and I can go on. Like, there are complex needs in our system, and so the quality education model isn't just about making sure that we have the resources in the classroom, it's making sure that we have the resources so that our district can thrive. Like transportation, for instance, it's reimbursed at 70%. That's 30% that then we need to fund. And so when we have transportation costs that are over $40 million a year, and we're paying the difference of that 30%, and these are like obligated, mandated transportation that we provide, that's a big ask. You know, the other thing that I'll talk about is our retirement accounts. Right, we have a $32 million difference that we need to make up that we learned about in November. You know, that eats into the resources and the support that we're able to put into the classroom. And so I love the question, and I will just say that we're just a complex system, and we have a tremendous amount of need, and until our need is met, we're going to continue to come and ask.
Follow-up, the governor yesterday was at a news conference. She was talking about the bill she had for more accountability, and she was all about testing, we need more testing. As you, I'm sure, are aware, parents, students say enough with the testing. That's really essentially the teacher's job. You know, teachers test throughout the year, every week, you know, every day. They pretty much have a good handle on where their students are. Where are you in terms of the idea of more testing as opposed to really focusing on the reason why there's performance issues, such as the absenteeism, to be able to help get kids into the class when they're having issues and problems, and smaller class sizes?
Yeah, I appreciate it. The question about accountability and testing is an important one. As I said before, we support the conversation on accountability. You know, we want our city to have high expectations for their school district. You know, we want folks in the school district to have high expectations for those who serve, and our families to have high expectations. And I think accountability is a piece of having those high expectations. I will say testing alone isn't going to solve some of the achievement concerns that we have in our system. Support will. Making sure that we have the resources so that we can fully fund our classrooms with the humans that they need to help close some of those gaps in with our learning. And so we are already engaged in conversations about accountability and assessments. More testing, I mean, I would love to hear some thoughts on that in the classroom. I think it's important that we continue to center the conversation on the needs of the classroom. I know all the work that we do in district office centers around school buildings, and so I just would continue to say that we're feeling pretty good about some of our monitoring that we have in place. We welcome the conversation about accountability. We're ready to lean into it, and with high expectations and high accountability should come high levels of support, high levels of funding.
Would you rather see that money then spent on working on the absenteeism issue and smaller class sizes?
Well, I'd like to see the money spent in ways that wrap around the needs of our students, right? We continue to have students with complex mental health needs. We have students who are missing a lot of class. I don't know if it's due to health, due to family obligations, or disengagement. You know, there's obviously different scenarios attached to different students. But what I can tell you is that absenteeism is, of course, a priority of us, right? Students aren't going to be able to learn if they're not in classrooms. So we want to continue to have the conversation and make sure that we're resourcing in appropriate ways.
Superintendent, thanks for taking our questions today. I'd like to ask you to drill down a little bit into some of the specifics of the governor's proposal, specifically her suggestion or her proposal that there be directed spending for school districts that are continuing to post low performance for local groups of students year after year. I wonder if it's your expectation, given your understanding of her proposal, that Portland would qualify for that directed spending, and can you tell us a little bit more about what it would mean to have the state or the governor be in charge of deciding how up to 25% of our state school funds would be allocated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I will say that we're still unpacking the proposal, and we look forward to seeing it as it's in its final state. So right now we're reading to understand and want to be in support of anything that's going to make a difference for our students in terms of positive outcomes. I will say, though, that we already in Portland are prioritizing conversations around our areas of need and our students who currently have high amounts of need. And I'm going to call Dr. Adams into the conversation that can speak a little more towards ways in which we're monitoring, collecting data, and setting our resources.
Thank you, Dr. Armstrong. Good morning, everyone. Bernard Adams, Chief Accountability and Equity Officer. I think to your point, Julia, we are still analyzing what's been put forth by Governor Kotek. We know internally, and I think you've sat through many of the presentations where we've taken data to the board that we monitor, our MAP data, our graduation data, our OSAS data. As soon as we have data that tells us how all students are performing, we take those data to our board of directors so they can understand, and everyone can understand, the current state of our students. And so what we continue to do is really try to focus more resources of the resources that we have, which we are saying is not quite enough to meet the quality education model. We continue to focus a percentage of those resources more heavily into schools and students where we have more focal students that need more support. We would love to be able to increase those supports with the quality education model. But until then, we will continue to lean into accountability. We are not satisfied until the bar is at 100% for all students, and we have a ways to go.
Do you think that Portland would qualify for state intervention or state-directed spending under the governor's proposal, as you understand it?
I'm not quite sure yet, because the proposal, as I can understand it, calls for multiple years and begins a few years out. So hopefully by then we'll have turned the ship and things won't be quite as they've been the last couple of years. So I'm unable to say exactly at this time.
State testing is still kind of below where it should be. You would say 100% right now, it's around that 55% mark. So how does funding then increase those test scores? Because students now, those high school freshmen that are just starting this year, were the fourth graders when they were sent home during the pandemic, and they're the ones that I think you're seeing the lowest test scores. Correct me if I'm wrong, but how does that funding then kind of translate to turning that ship around?
Well, as Dr. Armstrong said, we're a complex system, so you can't draw a straight, bright line between funding and then test scores automatically go up. And there's more to measuring our students than just simply performance on the test, although we know states are required to support standards, and then we're held accountable to students reaching those high standards. What I would say is every year we don't have adequate funding is a year we have to reduce programming that we know is critical for students. We have to make really tough choices. Dr. Armstrong talked about the work of our interventionists and how we're seeing positive gains for students, and this year we're having to look at reducing those interventionists by 20 FTE. And we know if we had additional funding, if we had the quality education model, we would be keeping those interventionists and possibly adding more intervention support, more social work support, more counseling support, because we know we need to wrap around students these days. It's not only about getting them to be successful in reading, writing, and mathematics. It's not only about teaching and learning, it's about those other wraparound supports that we know we should and can provide when we have adequate funding.
But if the state said make do with what you have, can you meet those needs?
We'll see. Thank you.
When there's a lot of talk about when the extra funding hit. Can you talk about where you guys were at within the pandemic and inflation and all of that, when that funding actually hit your books, what year it hit your books, and the impact it made during the time frame, et cetera?
Yeah, excellent. Great question. I'm calling forth my Chief Financial Officer, Michelle Morrison.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I can say that those pandemic relief funds came in 3 waves. And so as that happened, starting in 2021, we slowly started to build a plan. It was first a return to school plan it was more crisis response. And over the period of the next 2 years, the district was able to roll out a whole bunch of supplemental supports for students. And we are beyond that at this point and seeing some of those things go.
The extra funds that the legislature set aside, what was it, 2019, did that also not hit till 2020? Maybe I'm getting my dates mixed up here.
Are you speaking about the first year of the student investment account?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The first year of the student investment account, we were only funded at 30%. And so we created these plans that were much larger than that and had to scale them back. Those funds are, today, they're still tied up in supplemental supports for students, really focused on those 4 targeted areas to create growth in those categories. But unfortunately, as we reduce our general fund spending over time, that increases the reliance on those funds as well.
Folks, we're talking a lot about PPM today, but as you know, Oregon does spend about half nationally per pupil, right? And there certainly are states that spend significantly less per pupil that are seeing significantly better results, particularly for students who are from lower income families or who are kids of color. I hear you when you say we need more money, but you know, how do you then explain why it is that there are other places that are potentially doing better, getting more kids to learn to read and spending less per student?
I'll take that. You always ask the best questions. No offense to anyone else. Julie's a tough questioner. If you're talking about states like Louisiana, Mississippi, I think one of the things we see there, and one of the things I would hope would come forth with the governor's accountability bill, is the state departments of education really leaned in and provided resources, coaching support to schools and to districts that had focal students who weren't reading where they should have been nationally or weren't performing mathematics, right? And so we look forward to, I believe, that kind of partnership, that kind of deep investment from the State Department of Education in those states attributed to those results. And I would welcome that kind of investment and partnership with ODE.
Do you think that, can you say from a district perspective that you're not getting the kind of support and partnership from ODE that you need right now?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say I would welcome support similar to where we saw results happen in other states with deep coaching support. And I read that as a part of Governor Kotek's amendment to the bill, that there would be deep coaching support. And that coaching support, I hope, would mimic what we've seen work nationally.
Yeah, and I think the only thing that I want to add to that too is that when we began to compare states based on funding and achievement, I think it's important that we look at all areas, right? So what's the spending for students with IEPs, right? And what is the transportation costs? What are those obligations? I think it's clear, we've said multiple times, is that we have a tremendous amount of unfunded mandates, and it takes resources to meet those. I don't know how that compares to other states, and so I think the conversation is a little more nuanced than, you know, looking at achievement and spending and some of those other threads that we need to pull in there.
We'll take one more question.
Dr. Adams, just to follow, you mentioned about the 64%, or maybe the superintendent did, 64% meeting or exceeding their goals who are receiving help currently. When you hear that, 64% is sort of just about half, I mean, roughly. So the whole idea of wanting more money, needing more money, but if the money that's being spent is only essentially doing that much, people wonder, like, then what are we doing wrong? At this point, I mean, we're more than halfway through the year, and only half of them are doing okay.
Right. Well, first I would say the 64% is more than half, and to be fair, and without that intervention support, we didn't have 64% meeting those goals. And so we know that when we put supports in place, and during our first year interventionists, we weren't necessarily able to have a full person at every school that needed intervention support. And so what we are seeing are promising results. Is 64% enough? No, it isn't. We need 100%. But we need to also back our resources into things that we know are working. And our interventionists, our early evidence is showing that those positions are working in our schools.
So why would you cut them?
As I said earlier, we've had to make tough choices around what we can keep and what we can't. When you work in a school system and 85% of your funding is people, and then the majority of your people are in buildings, there are really tough choices that have to be made. We're not reducing all intervention support. We still have many interventionists, and we would like to have more.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap up as we conclude, what I really want to make sure that our public hears is that we believe in our Portland Public School teachers and the work that's happening in classrooms. Like, we believe that every single one of our students, every single one of our schools can thrive, can exceed standards, and the ask is very simple. We just want the resources to continue to move the needle in ways that we've already planned, and we need to make sure that resourcing in ways that our teachers continue to show up and lean into hard conversations about what it means to grow literacy, to make sure that our students are thriving academically, to be in the conversation of improvement and results. That's what we're all here for. That's what we expect. And that's what we hope happens when our legislators fully fund education in the state of Oregon.
Candace, are there parts of the school that we can get video of?
Let me get with Valerie and Sydney. Is it certain parts of the school that can get B-roll shots of?
In the school? Mm-hmm. No.
Okay.
I mean, they're in class right
Yeah.
now.
No, I get that.
The library.
Okay.
Some hallway shots? Or
Yeah, I mean, sure, like a hallway shot. I mean,
probably
yeah,
not
Sydney
in the
can
class,
go-
not in the classroom because it'll
Sure,
disrupt
yeah.
the learning. But
Okay.
Sydney, you're gonna okay.